This adventure had Arthur of Hansel's first, when young was the year, for he yearned to hear tales, though they wanted for words when they went to sup. Now are fierce deeds to follow, their fists stuffed full. Gawain was glad to begin those games in hall, but if the end be harsher, hold it no wonder, for though men are merry in mind after much drink, a year passes apace and proves ever new. First things in final conform but seldom, and so this Yule to the young year yielded place, and each season ensued at its set time. After Christmas there came the cold cheer of Lent, when with fish and plainer fare our flesh we reprove. But then the world's weather with winter contends, the keen cold lessens, the low clouds lift. Fresh falls the rain in fostering showers, on the face of the fields flowers appear, the ground and the groves wear gowns of green, birds build their nests and blithely sing, that solace of all sorrow with summer comes, for long, and blossoms day by day bloom rich and rife and throng, then every grove so gay of the greenwood rings with song. And then the season of summer with the soft winds, when zephyr sighs low over seeds and shoots, glad is the green plant growing abroad, when the dew at dawn drops from the leaves, to get a gracious glance from the golden sun. But harvest with harsher winds follows hard after, warns him to ripen well before winter comes, drives forth the dust in the draughty season from the face of the fields to fly high in the air. Wroth winds and the welkin wrestle with the sun, the leaves launch from the linden and light on the ground, and the grass turns to gray, that once grew green, then all ripens and rots that rose up at first, and so the year moves on yesterday's many, and winter once more, by the world's law, draws nigh. And Michaelmas the moon hangs wintry pale in the sky, Sir Gawain girds him soon for travails yet to try. Till All Hallows Day with Arthur he dwells, and he held a high feast to honor that night, with great revels and rich of the Round Table, then ladies lovely and lords debonair, with sorrow for Sir Gawain, were sore at heart, yet they covered their care with countenance glad. Many a mournful man made mirth for his sake. So after supper soberly he speaks to his uncle of the hard hour at hand, and openly says, "Now, liege lord of my life, my leave I take. The terms of this task too well you know. To count the cost over concerns me nothing, but I am bound forth betimes to bear a stroke from the grim man in green, as God may direct." Then the first and foremost came forth in throng, Gawain and Eric and others of note, Sir Dodonor of Sauvage, the Duke of Clarence, Lionel and Lancelot and Lucan the Good, Sir Bors and Sir Bedivere, big men both, and many manly knights more, with Mador de la Porte. All this courtly company comes to the king, to counsel their comrade, with care in their hearts. There was much secret sorrow suffered that day, that one so good as Gawain must go in such wise, to bear a bitter blow, and his bright sword lay by. He said, "Why should I tarry, and smile with tranquil eye, in destiny sad or merry, true men can but try." He dwelt there all that day, and dressed in the morning, asked early for his arms, and all were brought. First a carpet of rare cross was cast on the floor, where much goodly gear gleamed golden bright. He takes his place promptly and picks up the steel, attired in a tight coat of Turkestan silk, and a keenly Cappadoce close at the throat, that was lavishly lined with lustrous fur. Then they set the steel shoes on his sturdy feet, and clad his calves about with comely greaves, and plate well polished protected his knees, affixed with fastenings of the finest gold, fair cuisses enclosed, that were cunningly wrought, his thick thewed thighs with thongs bound fast, and massy chain mail of many a steel ring. He bore on his body above the best cloth, with brace burnished bright upon both his arms, good quarters and gay, and gloves of plate, and all the goodly gear to grace him well, that tied his surcoat blazoned bold, sharp spurs to prick with pride, and a brave silk band to hold, the broadsword at his side. When he had on his arms, his harness was rich, the least latchet or loop laden with gold. So armored as he was, he heard a mass, honored God humbly at the high altar. Then he comes to the king and his comrades in arms, takes his leave at last of lords and ladies, and they clasped and kissed him, commending him to Christ. By then Gringolet was girt with a great saddle that was gaily agleam with fine gilt fringe, new furbished for the need with nail heads bright. The bridle and the bars bedecked all with gold, the breastplate, the saddle bow, the side panels both, the caparison and the crupper accorded in hue, and all ranged on the red the resplendent studs, that glittered and glowed like the glorious sun. His helm now he holds up and hastily kisses, well closed with iron clinches and cushioned within. It was high on his head, with a hasp behind, and a covering of cloth to encase the visor, all bound and embroidered with the best gems, on broad bands of silk, and bordered with birds, parrots, and popinjays, preening their wings, love birds and love knots, as lavishly wrought as many women have worked 7 winters thereon, entire. Diadem costlier yet, that crowned that comely sire, with diamonds richly set, that flashed as if on fire. Then they showed forth the shield that shone all red, with the pentacle portrayed in purest gold. About his broad neck by that baldric he cast it, that was meet for the man, and matched him well. And why the pentacle is proper to that peerless prince, I intend now to tell, though detain me it must. It is a sign by Solomon sagely devised, to be a token of truth, by its title of old, for it is a figure formed of 5 points, and each line is linked and locked with the next, for ever and ever, and hence it is called, in all England, as I hear, the endless knot. And well may he wear it on his worthy arms, for ever faithful, fivefold and fivefold fashion. Was Gawain in good works, as gold unalloyed, devoid of all villainy, with virtues adorned in sight, on shield and coat in view, he bore that emblem bright, as to his word most true, and in speech most courteous knight. And first, he was faultless in his 5 senses, nor found ever to fail in his 5 fingers, and all his featly was fixed upon the 5 wounds that Christ got on the cross, as the creed tells. And wherever this man in melee took part, his one thought was of this, past all things else, that all his force was founded on the 5 joys. Most commonly in Middle English literature, the Annunciation, Nativity, Resurrection, Ascension, and Assumption. Although the list varies, these overlap but are not identical with the 5 joyful mysteries of the Rosary, which were not formally established until the 16th century. That the High Queen of Heaven had in her child, and therefore, as I find, he fittingly had on the inner part of his shield her image portrayed, that when his look on it lighted, he never lost heart. The 5th of the 5 fives, followed by his knight, were benevolence boundless, and brotherly love, and pure mind and manners, that none might impeach, and compassion most precious. These peerless 5 were forged and made fast in him, foremost of men. Now all these 5 fives were confirmed in this knight, and each linked in other, that in there was none, and fixed to 5 points, whose force never failed, nor assembled all on a side, nor asunder either, nor anywhere at an end, but whole and entire, however the pattern proceeded or played out its course. And so on his shining shield shape was the knot, royally in red gold against red gules. That is the peerless pentacle, prized of old in lore. Now armed is Gawain gay, and bears his lance before, and soberly said good day, he thought for evermore. He struck his steed with the spurs, and sped on his way, so fast that the flint fire flashed from the stones. When they saw him set forth, they were sore aggrieved, and all sighed softly, and said to each other, fearing for their fellow, ill fortune it is that you, man, must be marred, that most are worthy. His equal on this earth can hardly be found. To have dealt more discreetly had done less harm, and have dubbed him a duke with all due honor. A great leader of lords he was like to become, and better so to have been than battered to bits, beheaded by an elf man for empty pride. Who would credit that a king could be counselled so, and caught in a cavil in a Christmas game? Many were the warm tears they wept from their eyes when goodly Sir Gawain was gone from the court that day. No longer he abode, but speedily went his way over many a wandering road, as I heard my author say. Now he rides in his array through the realm of loggers. Sir Gawain, God knows, though it gave him small joy, all alone must he lodge through many a long night, where the food that he fancied was far from his plate. He had no mate but his mount over mountain and plain, nor man to say his mind to but Almighty God, till he had wandered well nigh into North Wales, and all the islands of Anglesey he holds on his left, and follows, as he fares, the fords by the coast, comes over at Holyhead, and enters next the wilderness of Wirral. Few were within that had great good will toward God or man, and earnestly he asked of each mortal he met if he had ever heard aught of a knight all green, or of a green chapel on ground thereabouts. And all said the same, and solemnly swore they saw no such knight all solely green in hue. Over country wild and strange the knight sets off anew, often his course must change before the chapel comes in view. Many a cliff must he climb in country wild, far off from all his friends, forlorn must he ride, at each strand or stream where the stalwart passed, 'twere a marvel if he met not some monstrous foe, and that so fierce and forbidding that fight he must. So many were the wonders he wandered among, that to tell but the 10th part would tax my wits. Now with serpents he wars, now with savage wolves, now with wild men of the woods that watch from the rocks, both with bulls and with bears, and with boars besides, and giants that came gibbering from the jagged steeps. Had he not borne himself bravely, and been on God's side, he had met with many mishaps and mortal harms, and if the wars were unwelcome, the winter was worse, when the cold clear rains rushed from the clouds, and froze before they could fall to the frosty earth. Near slain by the sleet he sleeps in his irons, more nights than enough, among naked rocks, where clattering from the crest the cold stream ran and hung in hard icicles high overhead. Thus in peril and pain and predicament dire, he rides across country till Christmas Eve or night, and at that holy tide he prays with all his might that Mary may be his guide, till a dwelling comes in sight. By a mountain next morning he makes his way into a forest fastness, fearsome and wild, high hills on either hand, with hoar woods below, oaks old and huge by the hundred together. The hazel and the hawthorn were all intertwined with rough ravelled moss that raggedly hung, with many birds unblithe upon bare twigs that peeped most piteously for pain of the cold. The good knight on Gringolet glides thereunder, through many a marsh and mire, a man all alone. He feared for his default should he fail to see the service of that sire that on that same night was born of a bright maid to bring us his peace. And therefore, sighing, he said, I beseech of thee, Lord, and Mary, thou mildest mother so dear, some harbourage where haply I might hear mass and thy matins tomorrow. Meekly I ask it. And thereto proffer and pray my pater in Ave and Creed. He said his prayer with sighs, lamenting his misdeed. He crosses himself and cries on Christ in his great need. No sooner had Sir Gawain sighed himself thrice than he was ware in the wood of a wondrous dwelling, within a moat, on a mound, bright amid boughs of many a tree great of girth that grew by the water, a castle as comely as a knight could own, on grounds fair and green, in a goodly park, the paradise of palings, planted about for 2 miles and more round many a fair tree. The stout knight stared at the stronghold great as it shimmered and shone amid shining leaves. Then, with helmet in hand, he offers his thanks to Jesus and Saint Julian, that are gentle both, that in courteous accord had inclined to his prayer. Now, fair harbour, said he, I humbly beseech. Then he pricks his proud steed with the plated spurs, and by chance he has chosen the chief path that brought the bold knight to the bridge's end in haste. The bridge hung high in air, the gates were bolted fast, the walls well framed to bear the fury of the blast. The man on his mount remained on the bank of the deep double moat that defended the place. The wall went in the water wondrous deep, and a long way aloft it loomed overhead. It was built of stone blocks to the battlement's height, with corbels under cornices in comeliest style. Watchtowers trusty protected the gate, with many a lean loophole to look from within. A better made barbican the knight beheld never. And behind it there hoved a great hall and fair, turrets rising in tiers with tines at their tops, spires set beside them, splendidly long, with finials well fashioned, as filigree fine. Chalk white chimneys over chambers high gleamed in gay array upon gables and roofs, the pinnacles and panoply pointing in air, so vied there for his view that verily it seemed a castle cut of paper for a king's feast. The good knight on Gringolet thought it great luck if he could but contrive to come there within to keep the Christmas feast in that castle fair and bright. There answered to his call a porter most polite, from his station on the wall he greets the errant knight. Good sir, said Gawain, wouldst go to inquire if your lord will allow me to lodge here a space? Peter, said the porter, for my part, I think so noble a knight will not want for a welcome. Then he bustles off briskly, and comes back straight, and many servants beside to receive him the better. They let down the drawbridge, and duly went forth, and kneeled down on their knees on the naked earth to welcome this warrior as best they were able. They proffered him passage, the portals stood wide, and he beckoned them to rise, and rode over the bridge. Men steadied his saddle as he stepped to the ground, and there stabled his steed many stalwart folk. Now come the knights and the noble squires to bring him with bliss into the bright hall. When his high helm was off, there hied forth a throng of attendants to take it and see to its care. They bore away his brand and his blazoned shield. Then graciously he greeted those gallants each one, and many a noble drew near to do the knight honor. All in his armor into hall he was led, where fire on a fair hearth fiercely blazed. And soon the Lord himself descends from his chamber to meet with good manners the man on his floor. He said, To this house you are heartily welcome. What is here is wholly yours, to have in your power and sway. Many thanks, said Sir Gawain. May Christ your pains repay. To embrace amain as men well met that day. Gawain gazed on the host that greeted him there, and a lusty fellow he looked, the lord of that place, a man of massive mould and of middle age. Broad, bright was his beard, of a beaver's hue, strong, steady his stance upon stalwart shanks, his face fierce as fire, fair spoken withal, and well suited he seemed in Sir Gawain's sight, to be a master of men in a mighty keep. They pass into a parlor, where promptly the host has a servant assign him to see to his needs, and there came upon his call many courteous folk that brought him to a bower where bedding was noble, with heavy silk hangings hemmed all in gold, coverlets and counterpanes curiously wrought, a canopy over the couch, clad all with fur, curtains running on cords, caught to gold rings, woven rugs on the walls of eastern work, and the floor underfoot well furnished with the same. Amid light talk and laughter they loosed from him then his war-dress of weight and his worthy clothes, robes richly wrought they brought him right soon, to change there in chamber and choose what he would. When he had found one he fancied, and flung it about, well fashioned for his frame, with flowing skirts, his face fair and fresh as the flowers of spring, all the good folk agreed that gazed on him then, his limbs array royally in radiant hues, that so comely a mortal never Christ made as he. Whatever his place of birth, it seemed he well might be, without a peer on earth in martial rivalry. A couch before the fire, where fresh coals burned, they spread for Sir Gawain splendidly now, with quilts quaintly stitched, and cushions beside, and then a costly cloak they cast on his shoulders, of bright silk, embroidered on borders and hems, with furs of the finest, well furnished within, and bound about with ermine, both mantle and hood. And he sat at that fireside in sumptuous estate, and warmed himself well, and soon he waxed merry. Then attendants set a table upon trestles broad, and lustrous white linen they laid thereupon, a salt cellar of silver, spoons of the same. He washed himself well, and went to his place. Men set his fare before him in fashion most fit. There were soups of all sorts, seasoned with skill, double-sized servings, and sundry fish, some baked, some breaded, some broiled on the coals, some simmering, some in stews, steaming with spice, and with sauces to sup that suited his taste. He confesses it a feast with free words and fair. They requite him as kindly with courteous jest, well sped. Tonight you fast and pray, tomorrow we'll see you fed. The night grows wondrous gay as the wine goes to his head. Then at times and by turns, as at table he sat, they questioned him quietly with queries discreet, and he courteously confessed that he comes from the court and owns him of the brotherhood of high-famed Arthur, the right royal ruler of the Round Table. And the guest by their fireside is Gawain himself, who has happened on their house at that holy feast. When the name of the knight was made known to the Lord, then loudly he laughed, so elated he was. And the men in that household made haste with joy to appear in his presence promptly that day, that of courage ever constant and customs pure, is pattern and paragon, and praise without end. Of all knights on earth most honored is he. Each said solemnly aside to his brother, now displays of deportment shall dazzle our eyes, and the polished pearls of impeccable speech. The high art of eloquence is ours to pursue, since the father of fine manners is found in our midst. Great is God's grace, and goodly indeed, that a guest such as Gawain he guides to us here, when men sit and sing of their Saviour's birth in view. With command of manners pure he shall each heart imbue, who shares his converse sure shall learn love's language true. When the night had done dining and duly arose, the dark was drawing on, the day nigh ended. Chaplains and chapels and churches about rang the bells aright, reminding all men of the holy evensong of the high feast. The Lord attends alone, his fair lady sits in a comely closet, secluded from sight. Gawain in gay attire goes thither soon. The Lord catches his coat, and calls him by name, and has him sit beside him, and says in good faith, no guest on God's earth would he gladlier greet. For that Gawain thanked him, the two then embraced, and sat together soberly the service through. Then the lady that longed to look on the knight came forth from her closet with her comely maids. The fair hues of her flesh, her face, and her hair, and her body, and her bearing were beyond praise, and excelled the queen herself, as Sir Gawain thought. He goes forth to greet her with gracious intent. Another lady led her by the left hand, that was older than she, and ancient it seemed, and held in high honor by all men about. But unlike to look upon, those ladies were, for if the one was fresh, the other was faded. Bedecked in bright red was the body of one, flesh hung in folds on the face of the other. On one a high headdress, hung all with pearls, her bright throat and bosom fair to behold, fresh as the first snow fallen upon hills. A wimple the other one wore round her throat, her swart chin well swathed all in white, her forehead enfolded in flounces of silk that framed a fair fillet of fashion ornate, and nothing bare beneath save the black brows, the two eyes and the nose, the naked lips, and they unsightly to see, and sorrowly bleared. A beldame, by God, she may well be deemed of pride. She was short and thick of waist, her buttocks round and wide. More toothsome to his taste was the beauty by her side. When Gawain had gazed on that gay lady, with leave of her lord, he politely approached. To the elder in homage he humbly bows. The lovelier he salutes with light embrace. He claims a comely kiss, and courteously he speaks. They welcome him warmly, and straightway he asks to be received as their servant, if they so desire. They take him between them, with talking they bring him beside a bright fire. Bade then that spices be freely fetched forth, to refresh them the better, and the good wine therewith to warm their hearts. The lord leaps about in light-hearted mood, contrives entertainments and timely sports, takes his hood from his head and hangs it on a spear, and offers him openly the honor thereof. Who should promote the most mirth at that Christmas feast? And I shall try for it, trust me, contend with the best, before I go without my headgear, by grace of my friends. Thus, with light talk and laughter, the Lord makes merry, to gladden the guest he had greeted in hall that day. At the last he called for light, the company to convey. Gawain says good night, and retires to bed straightway. On the morn, when each man is mindful in heart that God's Son was sent down to suffer our death, no household but is blithe for his blessed sake. So was it there on that day, with many delights, both at larger meals and less. They were lavishly served by doughty lads on dais, with delicate fare. The old ancient lady highest she sits, the lord at her left hand leaned, as I hear, Sir Gawain in the centre beside the gay lady, where the food was brought first to that festive board, and thence throughout the hall, as they held most fit. To each man was offered in order of rank. There was meat, there was mirth, there was much joy, that to tell all the tale would tax my wits. Though I paint me, perchance, to paint it with care, but yet I know that our knight and the noble lady were accorded so closely in company there, with the seemly solace of their secret words, with speeches well sped, spotless and pure, that each prince's pastime their pleasures far outshone. Sweet pipes beguile their cares, and the trumpet of martial tone, each tends his affairs, and those two tend their own. That day and all the next, their disport was noble, and the third day, I think, pleased them no less. The joys of St. John's Day were justly praised, and were the last of their like for those lords and ladies. Then guests were to go in the grey morning, wherefore they whiled the night away with wine, with mirth, moved to the measures of many a blithe carol. At last, when it was late, took leave of each other, each one of those worthies, to wend his way. Gawain bids good-bye to his goodly host, who brings him to his chamber, the chimney beside, detains him in talk, and tenders his thanks, and holds it an honor to him and his people that he has harbored in his house at that holy time, and embellished his abode with his inborn grace. As long as I may live, my luck is the better that Gawain was my guest at God's own feast. Noble sir, said the knight, I cannot but think all the honor is your own. May heaven requite it, and your man to command. I count myself here. I am bound and beholden, and shall be, come what may. The lord with all his might entreats his guest to stay. Brief answer makes the knight. Next morning he must away. Then the lord of that land politely inquired what dire affair had forced him at that festive time so far from the king's court to fare forth alone before the holidays wholly had ended in hall. In good faith, said Gawain, you have guessed the truth. On a high errand and urgent I hasten away, for I am summoned by myself to seek for a place. I would I knew whither or where it might be, for rather would I find it before the new year than own the land of loggers, so help me our Lord. Wherefore, sir, in friendship this favour I ask, that you say in sober earnest if something you know of the Green Chapel, on ground far or near, or the lone knight that lives there, of like hue of green. A certain day was set by a set of us both to meet at that landmark, if I might last, and from now to the new year is nothing too long, and I would greet the Green Knight there, would God but allow, more gladly by God's Son than gain the world's wealth. And I must set forth to search as soon as I may, to be about the business I have but 3 days, and would as soon sink down dead as desist from my errand. Then smiling said the Lord, your search, sir, is done, for we shall see you to that sight by the set time. Let grieve no more over the green chapel. You shall be in your own bed in blissful ease all the forenoon, and fare forth the first of the year, and make the goal of mid-morn to mind your affairs no fear. Tarry till the fourth day, and ride on the first of the year. We shall set you on your way. It is not 2 miles from here. Then Gawain was glad, and gleefully he laughed. Now I thank you for this, past all things else. Now my goal is here at hand. With a glad heart I shall both tarry, and undertake any task you devise. Then the host seized his arm, and seated him there. Let the ladies be brought to delight them the better, and in fellowship fair by the fireside they sit. So gay waxed the good host, so giddy his words. All waited in wonder what next he would say. Then he stares on the stout knight, and sternly he speaks. You have bound yourself boldly my bidding to do. Will you stand by that boast, and obey me this once? I shall do so indeed, said the doughty knight. While I lie in your lodging, your laws will I follow. As you have had, said the host, many hardships abroad, and little sleep of late, you are lacking, I judge, both in nourishment needful and nightly rest. You shall lie abed late in your lofty chamber, tomorrow until mass, and meet then to dine, when you will, with my wife, who will sit by your side, and talk with you at table, the better to cheer our guest. A hunting I will go, while you lie late and rest. The knight, inclining low, assents to each behest. And Gawain, said the good host, agree now to this. Whatever I win in the woods I will give you at eve, and all you have earned you must offer to me. Swear now, sweet friend, to swap as I say, whether hands in the end be empty or better. By God, said Sir Gawain, I grant it forthwith. If you find the game good, I shall gladly take part. Let the bright wine be brought, and our bargain is done, said the lord of that land. The two laughed together. Then they drank, and they dallied, and doffed all constraint, these lords and these ladies, as late as they chose. And then, with gaiety and gallantries and graceful adieus, they talked in low tones, and tarried in parting. With compliments comely they kissed at the last. There were brisk lads about, blazing torches to see them safe to bed, for soft repose long due their covenants. Yet awhile they repeat and pledge anew, that Lord could well beguile men's hearts with mirth and view.